She almost didn't wear it. That's the part no one writes about. That's the part that gets swallowed by the photographs and the headlines, and the 47 takes on what the tiara symbolizes for the monarchy going forward. Nobody was in the room. Nobody saw Charlotte sit at the vanity for 11 minutes without moving, staring at the velvet box like it had said something unkind to her. The dresser, a woman named Agnes, who had worked in the palace for 31 years and had the posture of someone who had witnessed approximately everything, set the box down and quietly stepped back. She had learned, over 3 decades, the difference between a royal who needed help and a royal who needed space. Charlotte needed neither. Charlotte needed something Agnes couldn't give her. The room smelled like lilies, yet her grandmother had always kept lilies. That was the first thing that got her. 4 months earlier, the Queen had been sitting in the yellow chair, the one by the window in her private sitting room that had been recovered twice in 40 years, but always in the same fabric, that particular shade of butter yellow that had no official name, but which every member of the family could conjure without trying. She had a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and she was looking at Charlotte the way she sometimes did. Not studying her, something gentler than that. "I want to show you something," she said. That was all, no preamble. The Queen had never believed in preamble. She walked, slower than she used to, and Charlotte had learned not to notice this too loudly. To keep her face arranged in a way that didn't betray the way her chest went tight every time, to the bureau against the wall. Second drawer. She knew exactly where it was. She had always known exactly where everything was. She came back with a box Charlotte had never seen before. Not the velvet box. A wooden one. Small, plain. The kind of thing that looks unremarkable until you realize someone has touched it 10,000 times. The wood at the corners was worn smooth in a way that takes years. Decades. It had been held in hands through things Charlotte couldn't imagine, and some she could. The Queen sat back in the butter-yellow chair and set the box on her knee and looked at it for a moment. "Your great-grandmother gave this to me," she said. 61 years ago, she said. And here she paused, and the pause was deliberate. The way all her pauses were, she said, "Don't show anyone until it matters. I've been waiting for it to matter." Charlotte looked at the box. Something had shifted in the air of the room the way air shifts before weather. "It matters now?" Charlotte said. The Queen looked up at her. "You matter now," she said. "That's not the same thing, but it's close enough." Inside the box was a photograph and a letter and a tiara that had no business being in a plain wooden box. Charlotte recognized it immediately, or thought she did. She had seen pictures. She had read the catalogs. But the photographs had lied about its size, its weight. The particular way the silver caught light and gave it back changed, somehow, warmer than it came in. "I don't understand," Charlotte said, though she did, a little. She just needed a moment. Your great-grandmother wore this the night she met your great-grandfather," the Queen said. "She was 19. She was terrified. She said the tiara was the only thing holding her upright." Charlotte looked at the photograph. A young woman, barely a woman really, standing at the edge of the person she would become, wearing the tiara, wearing an expression that was doing tremendous work. "She looks frightened," the Queen said. Yes, she was. She told me that herself many years later. She said she stood in a room full of people who expected her to be something finished when she was barely started. A beat. She said the tiara helped her pretend. Charlotte picked it up. Lighter than she expected. Heavier than it looked. She didn't know those could be simultaneously true about the same object until that moment. What does the letter say?" Charlotte asked. The Queen took a slow sip of her cold tea. "I don't know," she said. "It's addressed to you." The letter was in handwriting that slanted sharply to the right, the kind of handwriting that comes from someone who wrote quickly, who had things to say and insufficient patience for the rate at which a pen could say them. Charlotte read it once in the sitting room. with the Queen watching the garden through the window, giving her the privacy of a turned head. She didn't cry. She folded it and put it in her coat pocket and sat very still. The Queen did not ask. Charlotte had always loved her for the particular mercy of not asking. They drank cold tea in a room that smelled like lilies and didn't say anything for a while. Sometimes the most honest conversations are the ones where nobody speaks. And Charlotte had learned that from this woman. She had learned most of the important things from this woman. "Will you wear it?" the Queen asked eventually, lightly, like it didn't matter either way. The lightness was not casual. It was a gift, the gift of no pressure, which Charlotte recognized for what it was. Charlotte turned the tiara in her hands. The silver caught the afternoon light and scattered it. "Yes," she said. The Queen nodded once, settled deeper into her chair. "Good," she said. "It'll hold you up." That was 4 months ago. The Queen had been gone for 8 weeks now. 6 days, 4 hours. Charlotte's brain did this, kept the counter running. She couldn't make it stop. 8 weeks was not long enough to have learned how to carry it. She didn't think any amount of weeks would be. She had watched her mother grieve. I had watched other people grieve, had thought she understood the architecture of it. She had not understood anything. Grief was not a wave. Everybody said it was a wave. It wasn't. It was more like the furniture had all been moved 3 inches to the left in every room of a house she'd lived in her whole life. She kept walking into things. She kept reaching for things that weren't there. She kept turning to say something, and the person she wanted to say it to was just not. 8 weeks, 6 days, 4 hours. Agnes stood near the door with her 61 years of discreet patience. Charlotte looked at the velvet box on the vanity. She thought about a 19-year-old girl in a room full of people who expected her to be finished. She thought about what it takes to stand up straight when you are barely started. She thought about cold tea and the mercy of a turned head and the specific way someone says you matter now when they mean 50 other things. She opened the box. The tiara was exactly what it had been in the wooden box, in the sitting room, in the slanted afternoon light 4 months ago. No more, no less. Silver, warm, light in her hands and heavier than it looked. She put it on. Agnes made a small sound. Just barely. The kind of sound that isn't a sound so much as a held breath released. Charlotte looked at herself in the mirror. She looked, she thought, terrified. Good. She was. She was terrified in the exact right way, in the way of someone being asked to carry something precious and real, in the way of her great-grandmother at 19, and in the way of every woman before her who had stood at the edge of the person they were supposed to become and had no idea yet how to be finished. The tiara caught the light of the dressing room and gave it back changed. Warmer than it came in. "It'll hold you up," she thought. She stood. The letter had 4 paragraphs. Charlotte knew this without looking because she had memorized it. She didn't mean to. She'd only read it 3 times. 4, maybe, 5. But some things go into you before you've agreed to keep them. The words were in her now the way the lilies were in that room. Indelible. Part of the molecular structure of how she moved through the last 8 weeks. She kept the letter in the coat she'd been wearing that afternoon. She transferred it to every coat since. She didn't examine this too closely. But the first paragraph was not about the tiara. This had surprised her. She'd expected an origin story. The silversmith, the occasion, the historical weight of the thing. A great-grandmother who had lived through realities Charlotte couldn't fully hold in her mind, the kind of woman who understood objects as vessels, who would know to explain the vessel before handing it over. Instead, the first paragraph was about a horse. A brown mare named Biscuit, who had been, according to the letter, the single most stubborn creature God ever put on this earth, including your grandfather. The Queen, not the Queen yet, just a girl then, had been 12, and had wanted desperately to ride her, and had been thrown 3 times before anyone suggested she might stop trying. She hadn't stopped. 4th try. The horse relented, or something in both of them aligned, and they had galloped across a field in the early morning before anyone was awake to see, and the girl had felt something that she spent 2 sentences trying to describe, and then simply wrote, "I understood then that the things worth having will throw you first." Charlotte had stood in the sitting room with the turned head of her grandmother a few feet away, and read that, and felt it run through her like cold water in a hot room. The second paragraph was about Charlotte's mother. Not directly. Sidelong. In the way this family had always communicated the things that mattered most. By approaching them at an angle, never straight on, because straight on was too much, too bright, like looking directly at a thing that would change you and having to admit in real time that you were being changed. "When you were born," the letter said, "I watched your mother hold you and I recognized her face. I had made that face. Every woman in this line has made that face. It is not a happy face, exactly, and it is not a frightened face, exactly. It is the face of someone understanding for the first time what they would be capable of destroying themselves to protect." Charlotte had not expected to find her mother in the letter. She was not prepared for it. She had pressed on. The third paragraph was short, 3 sentences. It was the weight-bearing wall of the whole letter, and it had been written simply, without decoration, in the same slanted handwriting that rushed through everything else. "I do not know what you will be asked to do. I do not know what rooms they will put you in. But I know what you come from, and I know that what you come from does not break." That was all. Charlotte had read those 3 sentences standing up and finished them sitting down. She didn't remember the transition. Some things move you before your body gets the notification. The 4th paragraph was about the tiara. Here, finally. The great-grandmother had been 19. She had been given the tiara by her own mother an hour before a state dinner she was completely unequipped for, full of people who would look at her and decide things. She had stood in a room very much like the one Charlotte would stand in 60 years later, the same mirror probably, the same quality of light, different century, and she had felt the silver settle onto her head and she had thought, "I am not ready." She had written this in the letter without apology. I was not ready. I'm not certain readiness is a real thing, or whether we simply call it that after the fact when we realize we survived. She had worn the tiara. She had walked into the room. She had been looked at and decided about, and she had survived the deciding and gone home and sat in a chair, and her mother had brought her tea. Cold, she'd let it go cold. She always let it go cold. And nobody said anything for a while, and that was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her. "I am leaving this for you," the letter concluded, "not because you need something from me. You won't need something from me. You will need something from yourself, and you will find it, and you will forget you found it and have to find it again, and that is the whole of the thing, really. I'm leaving this for you because some days the silver helps." But Charlotte had read it in the sitting room. She had folded it and put it in her pocket. She had sat across from the woman who had kept this letter for 61 years, kept it in a plain wooden box, worn smooth at the corners, held through things Charlotte couldn't imagine, and they had drunk cold tea together in a room that smelled like lilies, and the afternoon had gone orange and long, and neither of them had said much. 2 months later, the Queen was gone. 6 weeks after that, Charlotte stood in the dressing room and put the letter back in her coat pocket and looked at herself in the mirror wearing the tiara, and she thought, "I am not ready." And then she thought, "Good." And then she picked up the coat and walked toward the door, and the room's full of people who would look at her and decide things. Agnes held the door. "Ma'am," she said. Just that. Charlotte nodded once. The same nod, the same economy of gesture, the same whole sentence compressed into a single motion. She had learned that from someone. She would carry it the way she carried the letter, transferred coat to coat, kept close, held without examination. The door opened onto a corridor, and the corridor led to the stairs, and the stairs led to the rest of it. All of it. The entirety of the enormous, terrifying, silver-weighted, lily-smelling cold tea rest of it. She walked. The tiara caught the light of the corridor and gave it back changed. Warmer than it came in. She did not look back. The room was exactly as loud as she expected, and exactly as lonely. This was the thing about rooms full of people. They contained no one, really. They contained performance. And they contained posture and practiced smiles and sentences begun in one decade and finished in another. Charlotte had been walking into rooms like this her entire life, and she had never once felt found in them. She stood at the entrance for 4 seconds. She counted them. She had learned to count things, it helped. And then she walked in. The tiara held. She was intercepted almost immediately by Lord Aberston, who was 83 and had outlasted everyone's expectations through what Charlotte privately believed was sheer ornery persistence. He took her hand in both of his. His hands were cold. They were always cold. She thought they had probably been cold since approximately 1987. And he looked at her with the watery, unflinching eyes of someone who had watched time do its work on everyone he'd ever loved. She would have been proud, he said. Charlotte waited for the rest. There was no rest. He meant that to be sufficient. She was proud of very little, Charlotte said. She had high standards. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he laughed. A real one. It came out of him surprised, like he'd stopped expecting real laughter, and then there it was. God, yes, he said. Yes, she did. He moved on. Charlotte moved on. The room moved around her like a current, and she moved through it like something that had learned, slowly and against its will, to swim. She found a corner near the tall windows. There were always tall windows at these things. The windows let in the dark and let in the light of the grounds, and she stood near one and held a glass of champagne. She had no intention of drinking, and looked at the room. She was looking for him. She knew she was. She had been trying not to know it for 40 minutes. William was on the other side of the room, doing what he always did in rooms like this, managing them, absorbing the weight of the space, redistributing it, saying exactly the right thing to exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. She had watched him do this her whole life. She had watched him learn it from their mother and their father and the particular grueling education that comes from being looked at since before you can understand what being looked at means. He felt her looking. He always did. He glanced across the room and found her in the corner, and she saw, in the half-second before he arranged his face again, the exact same thing she had felt when she put the tiara on that morning. Not ready, doing it anyway. She raised her champagne glass a fraction of an inch. He did the same. That was sufficient. That was everything. An hour in, a girl approached her. 14, maybe 15. Wearing an expression that was doing tremendous work. The same expression in the photograph. The same expression Charlotte had been wearing all day without knowing it. The girl's mother hovered 6 feet back with the particular hover of a parent trying to appear relaxed, which is the least relaxing thing in the world to witness. The girl curtsied. Correctly, Charlotte noticed. Somebody had practiced. I wanted to say, the girl started, and then stopped. Her hands were clasped in front of her with the white-knuckle grip of someone holding themselves together through manual labor. I wanted to say that I was very sorry about Her Majesty. She stopped again. Her eyes went bright. Charlotte waited. She was the person I wanted to be, the girl said. When I grew up, she was who I thought about, when it was hard. She exhaled. I don't know why I'm saying this to you. I'm sorry. Charlotte looked at her. 14 years old, standing in a room full of performance and posture, white-knuckle hands, honest eyes. The room moved around them both, and Charlotte felt something shift in her chest. Not break, exactly, but open, like a window. "Don't be sorry," Charlotte said. "She'd have hated the sorry." The girl let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "What she would have wanted," Charlotte said, "was for you to tell her yourself, which you can't now, so tell her anyway, that's what I do." She paused, felt the weight of the tiara on her head, warm. Miss Silver, a thing that had been held through things. She still listens. She didn't know if she believed that. She did know she needed it to be true. The girl's mother arrived, smoothly, with a seamlessness that Charlotte recognized as practiced love, the love that steps in before things fall apart. They moved away. The girl looked back once over her shoulder with an expression Charlotte would think about for a long time. The evening ended the way these evenings always ended, with gradual erosion, the room thinning by degrees, the noise level dropping in layers, the lights staying bright past the point where they made sense. Charlotte left at 10:30. William caught her at the coat check. Of course he did. He had always had an internal GPS calibrated to her exits. "How was it?" he asked. "It was fine," she said. I stayed upright." He looked at the tiara. She watched him look at it. Something moved across his face. "I remember when she showed you that," he said. "You came and found me after. You wouldn't tell me what the letter said." "I still won't." "I know." He handed her coat over. His hands paused on the shoulders of it for just a moment, a fraction of a moment, barely there. There and gone. "She would have been very annoying about tonight," he said. "She would have had 17 opinions about the floral arrangements." Charlotte laughed. It came out of her surprised, like she'd stopped expecting it. "The lilies were too short," she said. "She would have said the lilies were too short. She would have called someone. She would have made a whole thing out of it. She would have been right." Silence. The kind that isn't empty. In the kind two people construct together over years of standing in it side by side. "Go home," he said. "Sleep. You too." She put the coat on, and the letter was there in the pocket where it always was, and she pressed her hand against it once through the wool. Not consciously, just the way you check for things you're afraid of losing, and walked out into the night. The car was waiting. The night was cold and clear in the specific way November nights get, the air with a bite to it that feels almost like punctuation, like the day itself is indicating that something is over. Charlotte stood on the steps for a moment before she got in. She looked up. She did this sometimes. She didn't have a name for it. It wasn't really looking for anything. It was more like making herself available to be found. Standing in an open space with her face turned upward in case that meant something, in case it helped. "She still listens," she had told the girl. The tiara was cold against her head now. Or the cold night had found its way to the silver. One or the other. Both. She thought about a girl on a horse who got thrown 3 times and tried a 4th. She thought about cold tea in a butter-yellow room and the mercy of a turned head. She thought about what you come from does not break. She thought about a great-grandmother at 19, not ready, walking in anyway. She thought about the girl with the white-knuckle hands and the honest eyes who had wanted to grow up to be something. She thought, me too. She thought, I'm still trying. She got in the car. The tiara caught the light of the passing city through the window and scattered it across the interior in small silver fragments. Warm. Changed. She pressed her hand against the letter in her pocket, and the car moved forward through the dark, and she looked out at the city going by. All its lit windows and its people inside them, all its private griefs held in rooms smaller than any she would ever stand in, all its ordinary, unbearable dailiness. And something in her chest was open, not healed. She didn't believe in healed, not yet, maybe not ever, not the way people described it, like a scar that finishes, open, like a window, like the thing that lets in the air that lets you breathe. And the city moved past, and the silver caught the light, and Charlotte sat in the back of the car wearing a tiara that had been worn through things she would spend a lifetime only partially understanding, and she pressed her hand against the letter, and she breathed. She breathed. That was enough. That was the whole of the thing, really. End.